In today's episode, I want to talk about an amorphous subject, something that's difficult for people to wrap their minds around, but something that keeps coming up over and over and over in our conversations. As we grow in our careers, you're going to hear this in your performance reviews. You're going to hear it from your manager, and it's this term. It's this term that often gets abused and misunderstood, and unfortunately, it also is very important. It's an incredibly important concept, and the more you can understand about it, especially if you're an engineering leader, especially if you are, if you have people reporting to you, if you are a senior engineer, if you're some kind of, if you're responsible for some kind of performance situation, whether that's you're mentoring other engineers, whatever it is. If you are in any kind of leadership position, and probably you will be at some point in your career, especially if you're listening to this show, then this concept is going to become more important to you as you grow in that leadership. And the concept is accountability. Accountability. If you have a visceral reaction to this, I hope that you will stick around, because so many people have unfortunately had bad experiences with this word, with this concept, with this amorphous subject of accountability, because the companies they've worked at or the people they've worked with have bastardized the meaning of this word. And I want to kind of help you set straight, some concepts about accountability that may help you in your career. And unfortunately, we don't have a perfect agreement system in this industry. We don't have, certifications on defining accountability. That doesn't exist, right? And maybe that's unfortunate. Maybe it's perfectly fine. If you are a manager, I want to kind of impart to you, what I believe a good working definition is of accountability, a pragmatic, functional definition, and it'll take some of the scary parts out of it for you. If you're a engineer that's listening to this, maybe you can give this to your leaders and ask, do they agree with this, right? Do they agree with, this framing for accountability? Let's talk about the bad version first. And hopefully you'll kind of see why I believe it's been bastardized so much. The bad version of accountability, if you hear this word and you immediately think, oh, that's somebody coming in and explaining to me everything I've done wrong. Or if you hear this word and the first thing you think is, that's somebody who has no idea. They're setting unrealistic goals for me. I tell them that I can't do them, and then they punish me for not being able to do something that I told them I couldn't do. Right? That's a bad definition of accountability. If you have the experience of being held accountable to something that you didn't know you were responsible for, right? Performance review rolls around and you're being held accountable to something that's a surprise, something that is news to you, something that you didn't predict was going to happen, right? There's a lot of definitions of accountability here that fall in this bad category because it has been weaponized. It has been weaponized. It's been turned into a way of, kind of backdooring performance management, hard performance management conversations. And, in this bad version, leaders kind of shirking their responsibilities for growing their people, for communicating to their people, for creating clarity. We can hide behind this idea of accountability and say, well, you didn't do your job well, and therefore I'm going to hold you accountable. And I want to kind of set that definition out as, that's not a version of accountability that I would accept as authoritative. So, and it's amorphous because there are so many different applications of this and so many of those bad versions of it that people start to lose sight of the fundamental meaning of accountability in the first place, and perhaps most importantly, what is the function of it? And what is the pragmatic reason why we even use this word, why this concept comes up in business at all? And I think we maybe when we were younger, certainly in school, when we are held to account, it usually is a negative event for us, right? In most of these circumstances, this experience of being held to account tends to mean that you're being audited in some way, right? I want to talk about this from a productive, positive perspective, because I think that's the useful version of accountability, and it's something that if you want to get better at what you do, you would invite. But if you want to grow in your career, you're going to invite accountability. If you want to confront reality, you're going to invite accountability. I want to kind of shift the frame to how we think about software. If I build a platform that performs a set of critical functions for my business, let's say I run payroll through this platform, and I have a set of expectations of the platform, right? These expectations might be features that they publish. They may be, things that we take for granted that are not necessarily published, but are maybe they're legal requirements that they say, we follow all legal requirements. They may be some table stakes things that we take for granted, like financial accuracy, right? That's not a feature that they have to tell us about, but it certainly is something we would expect. And so if I build this software, or if let's say I'm using this software rather, right? And I perform a function. Let's say I run payroll. I click a button, I run payroll. And 9 out of 10 times things go as expected, right? And then every once in a while, I get a major deviation from the correct output. Let's say I overpay all of my employees by $100. Or maybe worse, I underpay them by $100, and I don't know this. So if I file a bug report, the basis of this bug report is, hey, something unexpected happened. Something that deviates from our agreement about what the software should do has occurred. And if the person who wrote the software was to receive this feedback and go and try to figure out what happened, they're performing an accounting function. They're performing, and not just because it's financial in nature, but because observability and debugging fundamentally depends on some kind of accountability. And what we mean in this kind of functional scenario of accountability is being able to identify the root cause of some event, being able to trace what happened in each situation, right? This is why it feels like auditing when we are quote, held to account. And so in a good accountability scenario, what we're really wanting to identify is, what is the expected outcome? What is the agreement? What is the promise? What is the standard that I am setting or that is set for me to meet? Do I agree to it, right? Good managers will talk about both the explicit and the implicit things. Right, we expect you to not do illegal things, for example. Right, some of this stuff would show up in an employee handbook. Some of these things would show up on a skill matrix. Some of these things would show up in your direct feedback from your manager. All right, that last one tends to be where things fall apart. Where, hey, you know what? I thought I was doing a good job, and performance review time comes around and I wasn't. Somebody believed I wasn't. They didn't give me that feedback. And so, they'd be like that customer never actually filing the bug report and just churning. Or they just leave the company because, hey, you know what? You did something unexpected and therefore immediate consequence. I'm holding you to account by leaving, right? And so the company never had a chance to fix the problem. We have this situation all the time in the workplace where something has gone wrong, but the communication lines are not really well established. And so what you want in a healthy organization, in a healthy team, in a healthy relationship between you and your manager is accountability at all steps, because it gives you the opportunity to recognize when something has deviated from the agreement. When something is deviated from the agreement, then now you have an accountability scenario, right? You have something to hold account to. So if I agree, let's set up a basic example of this. Most, and just as heuristic, most good engineers will invite accountability, and they will invite, a commitment inspection, which I would say is like a form of holding people accountable. So how do you hold somebody accountable? Let's say that you have, let's say you're working in increments. You have a sprint. Most people work in sprints or have at least been exposed to this idea. You have some increment, you have some 2-week period or whatever the amount of time is, doesn't really matter, right? But in that time, you talk with a stakeholder. Maybe it's a product manager, maybe it's your engineering manager, maybe it's the CEO of your company or a customer, whoever it is. You talk with this person, you say, yes, I think I can get X done, but I can definitely commit to getting this part of it done, right? There's two things that you've said here. You've said one that is a guess or is some kind of forecast. It's some kind of, belief. It's an estimate, right? And then the other is a commitment. And what very often happens, again, in a bad application of accountability, is we coerce the estimate, the guess, the forecast into a commitment when it never really was, right? And then on the flip side, when we are being too soft on accountability, when we're not holding anybody accountable, we treat everything as if it's up in the air and maybe it will happen and nothing is ever a commitment, right? And truthfully, the healthiest organizations I've been a part of tend to have both. Right? We have a high confidence interval that something is going to get done, and we're willing to accept some risk in order to make sure that it happens. So, hey, you know what? I think it's going to get done. I have a pretty high confidence. If it's not going to get done, then I'm going to commit to doing whatever's necessary to make sure it does. Right? And what this does for you as the person being held accountable is it creates clarity of expectation for how you are doing your job. Okay, why do we need to do this in the first place? Why is this pragmatic, or why does this matter to a business? For one simple reason, the business is exchanging your time and your energy for some value that the business is gaining from that time and energy, and they're giving you compensation for that. They're giving you some kind of money, benefits, culture, whatever, right? So your employment is contingent on you meeting some expectation of your employment, some terms of your employment. This seems like a simple concept, right? But if we can't figure out accountability, then the fundamental idea of employability becomes a fluid concept. Of course, we're going to end up potentially getting laid off unexpectedly because the conditions of my employment or the conditions of my good standing as an employee are up in the air. They're not clear to me. They're not clear to you. Now, we're kind of glossing over the fact that even in scenarios where people are, high performers, where they're held to account and they stand up to that scrutiny, Sometimes businesses still fail, and there's kind of a harsh reality of a free market that we have to deal with, that we're not really talking on this episode of the show about. What we really want to inspect, though, is why does first of all, this accountability stuff often goes wrong, mostly because of a lack of clarity. When it goes right, it really creates a situation where you can identify opportunities for improvement and get better, right? If you don't have accountability, if you say, hey, you know what? Maybe we'll get it done, maybe we won't. And then you don't get it done and nobody says anything about it. It just flies under the radar. This is normal, or we don't care enough about it to ask any questions about it. There's no accountability process at all. But now you don't have the opportunity to improve anything. This creates risk for the company and ultimately for you as a result of that. Right? If you want to get better at your job, you want to know when failure has occurred. And the only way you know when failure has occurred is if there's some way to account for failure. Failure occurs, for example, when you make a commitment and you don't actually meet the commitment. Now, there's many reasons why failure may occur. Some of them are out of your control. An important part of recognizing a good accountability system is understanding how to deal with the varied ways that things can go wrong. Hey, you know what? I committed to a thing. I didn't follow through with that commitment. It's not a personal judgment on me necessarily because, hey, I broke my arm. Right? And so we're accounting for the fact that I broke my arm against the fact that I failed on my commitment. And then we move forward, right? We try not to break our arm again. Of course we do, right? But there may be a situation where you say, hey, I didn't follow through because I overcommitted. I committed to too many things. Well, why did that happen? Why did I overcommit? Well, I felt a pressure to overcommit because we've got a board meeting coming up. Well, overcommitting puts us in a situation where, the board meeting's coming up. We have the illusion that we're going to get something done when we're not actually going to get something done. That's a risk to the business. You mitigated the short-term risk to your personal standing by saying, yeah, I can get all this stuff done, but you're creating an additional risk for the company. The fact that you're not trending to actually getting it done, or you're creating a personal risk for your own burnout. And so you learn how to adjust by way of this accountability measure, right? In a bad scenario, a bad manager would say, well, then you just need to spend the extra time to make it happen. Right? There are times when a little bit of extra time might make sense or might be the most pragmatic thing, or you might be that might be acceptable to you or whatever. But there are other times where, hey, the gap here is actually not something that I can just spend a couple of extra hours to close. I'm overcommitted by 20, 30%. I need to do something about this. We as a company, we as a team, you and I, you as my manager and we need to figure this out. And the only way that happens is if you have clarity of accountability. And so accountability is a tool that enables continuous improvement. That's the real argument I want to make here. And it enables it at a full kind of deflection. Like it enables it, all the way down to the individual and all the way up to the top level, of an organization. If an organization can learn how to practice accountability as an inspection and observability tool, and going back to our error reporting or bug reporting situation, we use this as an inspection and observability tool where we say, hey, look, something unexpected has occurred. Now we can inspect, now we can adapt. And so if we're avoiding, a very simple way to know if you have an accountability system in place or not is understanding exactly what your recent adaptations were and why. If you have no recent adaptations, if your retros are constantly ending in everything's going great, or if they're just a complaint session and there's not really a lot being done, by the way, this goes both directions. So if somebody says, hey, we keep on running into this friction, and the manager says, I hear you, and then nothing is ever done about it, the manager expects people to stop complaining. This is bad accountability. The manager's not being held accountable to improving the friction on the team, right? Okay, so all this really is about is setting expectations and understanding when things are breaking from those expectations. That is really what accountability comes down to. And so if you have been avoiding conversations about accountability with your manager, it's probably because there's fear associated with it. There's some uncertainty. There's something about, what are they going to say to me? I don't know where I stand. I'm afraid that I'm not doing as well as I should be, or I'm afraid to lose my job. There's some kind of fear associated with this word. And I want you, if you're in that situation, if you're afraid of this, I want you to send this to your manager. Have the hard conversation with them, because the best way for you to grow, inspect, and adapt in your career is to start by resetting what it means to hold somebody accountable, or to be held accountable yourself, and to learn how to do that, right? To learn how to become resilient and improve as a result of accountability, rather than always shaking in your boots when somebody says that word. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode of Developer Tea. Hopefully, this idea of taking an ambiguous concept, difficult concept, and breaking it down into a pragmatic definition is a useful idea. We might do more of these kind of pragmatic series, pragmatic concepts in the future, where we break down otherwise ambiguous terms into more concrete, applicable concepts for you to use. Thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, leave us a review in iTunes. Share this episode, especially again if you believe that your manager could benefit from this new definition. If you feel like, hey, we need to have a conversation about what this means or how we hold each other accountable, send them this episode as a jumping off point. We didn't define every possible framework for how to do this or anything like that. That's not the goal in this episode. Instead, it's to start the conversation about what healthy accountability looks like and what the goal is in the first place of accountability for this constant improvement concept. So send them this episode, leave a review in iTunes. This episode is going to be up on YouTube as well. Go and check that out. Thanks so much for listening, and until next time, enjoy your tea.